next before lunch will be John Grewar and Louis from Schalkwyk. They'll be talking about risk flags on tagged animals.
I must say, after hearing some of these talks, I'm getting a bit scared because we're not that much into EarthRanger. I had to go and find a few features this morning that you explained, so it's nice to see, and we definitely will use a bit more. But just going to show you something that we've been working on the last couple of years, actually, after we have done a study about 5 years ago when we lost a pack of wild dogs to the Stemper and KRUGER National Park, and just shortly actually before East Africa lost a few more. We didn't know at that time we only lose one, which we're thankful for, because I know the others have lost a lot more. But basically, KRUGER is our biggest in this part of of Southern Africa. Is one of the big strongholds of Africa's second most endangered carnivore, and it was quite an important event, I think. And then we collared them to follow up on our vaccinations. So we actually gathered for 3 years quite detailed collar data, which was sort of unintentional from a spatial analysis point of view. And in the process, you know, sort of learned a few things. But then also, I mean, the history of KRUGER is quite interesting with wild dogs. There was a nice population around 1995 of 450 adults. And then there was a bit of a collapse, and if you look at the graphs, you can see it's pretty much in the north of the park that this collapse happened. And even though there was really intensive monitoring happening in the park further south, the northern collapse wasn't really that well described at the time. So we also realized that monitoring is a pretty important thing. It has to happen all the time. So then, based on that data that we gathered through the health survey, we actually realized that, well, not realized, we knew that they're moving big areas, but we saw that if we had this data in real time, maybe we can do a little bit more with it and actually use it in real time for management purposes, not just from a research point of view. So the idea came about to create this real-time system that would analyze the data just like we did in retrospect, but actually now in real time. So we started off by trying to replicate a similar thing that we did with the previous project, and we collared one dog in each of the packs. We estimated about 30 packs at the time. We're now at 30 collars, and there's still a few packs to go. So obviously we're doing well. The population is doing well anyway at the moment in the park, so we're glad. But then we wanted to see it's the obvious things. There's nothing sort of new or fancy, but we just wanted to know if a collar dog dies, at least try and find it as quickly as possible, see if there's any opportunity to identify why it died. You know, obvious causes being lying, but if there's something else, maybe figure out what's happening there and learn a bit more about mortalities, because we also learned from that collar data that if that pack that died of distemper wasn't next to a tourist road, it might have gone completely unnoticed, because the entire pack died within a week in a spot of about 100-meter radius. So unless we had something to go back onto like a collar, we would have probably missed the entire outbreak, unless it's spread. The other thing is that dogs obviously go out and they get persecuted outside. They're not always that popular, especially on some of the game farms, because they can wreak some havoc there. But then also we've got some that actually goes out and then outside at the park because it's safer there from lions, and they actually don't get noticed sometimes. So sometimes being outside is safe, and sometimes being outside is really dangerous. So persecution risk was an issue. Snaring is a major issue. Well, I think so, because we probably removed about 30 odd snares from wild dogs in the last 5 years. Of those, about 20, or make it 40, but about 20 of them was just in the last 12 months. So it's obviously on the rise, which we kind of expected with the COVID lockdowns happening. But it was something that we definitely wanted to work on, because we spent a lot of time chasing after dogs with snares. And then disease, just because it was after the outbreak, we wanted to get a little bit ahead of the disease thing. And if we had to vaccinate again, not just do it blindly, but have a bit of a plan in place. And there's a lot of sort of ad hoc spatial analysis that comes out of spatial data anyway, which we'll quickly talk about. And then something that's been happening anyway for many, many years, Grant's been doing it, and he should actually be speaking about that. But the general monitoring of the population is done quite intensively, actually, and the photographic record is actually amazing. But that's also obviously improved over the last few years with the AI tools like WildDog. And but this would also now give us an opportunity, because we've got the packs collared, to see them more often and go and follow up on them. Mortality is not much to say there. It's nowadays easier with the collars actually telling you that the dog is dead, or a little bit of movement analysis if there's no accelerometer on the collar yet. Geofences, we had a slightly different approach to a geofence, I guess, that we didn't just want to know whether it was in or out. We wanted to know if it was out, is it in danger? Because that's different. You don't want to let a manager know a dog is out, but he's safe. You actually want to let him know he's out and he's in big danger, so you have to respond immediately. So we actually took polygons of the areas outside the reserve, and we allocated risk to them. And then when you're outside, you actually have a risk allocation, not just a in-out value. And that then obviously is more useful to a manager to decide whether he should respond to a dog being outside of the geofence. With snaring, there was quite a bit of records, not always that good, but there's a bit of records being collected. It's getting better and better. Obviously, we also work in a reserve that's using Seymour, and then a lot of reserves open to Kruger Park that uses different systems. EarthRanger often a lot. So we had sort of different sources of data. Sometimes it's Excel spreadsheets or even Word documents, tables and Word documents. But we took those, created a risk map of those, and then tried to see if we can learn something from that. So we also had a few snares happening in the previous work we did with the disease survey. So we could actually kind of train the analysis a little bit with some real snares. So what we do is basically create a risk map, like you can see in the background there, the ugly purple and yellow one. And then we take the dog's movement, write a little bit of algorithm to take into consideration that these sort of low frequencies we get, data we get from collars, unfortunately. We hope one day we'll get much higher frequency data. And then work out what we reckon the risk is of getting into a snare line in that process. And if they go past a certain threshold, which we determine based on the historic data, then we send an alert to say that this pack might have been they have been in the high snare risk area, and there might be a snare. And so far, so good. We've really had some nice successes. Since we've had lots of snares this year to deal with, we could actually test the system quite well. Something a little bit more, I guess, advanced, and which we are actually not implementing that much yet, but we've tested before, is now with all this data, we've thought of disease being as real time as a snaring, and then we realize it's probably not as useful to let a guy know that a dog's in a high risk of domestic dog contact area. You could do that, but it will probably become a lot of, I wouldn't say false alarms, but nuisance alarms in a sense. So we've done social network analysis after the outbreak and realized got a lot of value from that, in the sense that we knew who the major sort of super spreaders were in the population. And also that certain times of the year, like on those maps there on the left, you can see non-denning versus denning on the right. And that's probably what saved us during our outbreak. But that these things could be useful then for managers, definitely. So that, and then also knowing which packs are more often in contact with domestic dogs. And that's probably, if you want to start vaccinating, start where it makes the most impact. So all of that had to be put into a system. And for that, I'll definitely ask John to explain better, because I get lost after that.
Yeah, thanks, Louis. The whole goal of what we were doing is to get it as close to real time as possible. We had to have automated integration with different existing systems, and the big goal as well is that we wanted to use the outputs of the program needed to be with existing platforms as well, which is where we start to speak about integration with EarthRanger. But that little schematic on the screen now is a schematic of the platform that we've built. So we've tried to set it up in a way that it's species independent. So we've piloted in WildDogs now, but the whole goal is to not be limited to specific species. And hopefully the next project will be one on vulture. And we understand that all these tracking devices have come with their own APIs and their own integrations with other systems like MoveBank, and listening to Smart Integrate, that would be another one. And our whole goal was to use a serverless Amazon Web Service process to pull in all these data into a Postgres database, and we're using some Python coding for that. And effectively, the base data that we want is where is each animal at what point in time. So it's animal point in time data, and then we've effectively, to allocate risk of different processes to animals, the system is also risk independent because we understand that there are many different risks exist for these animals. So in our example, the WildDog, Louise discussed the snare and the persecution risk. And to allocate these risks onto this tag data, we effectively choose any existing analytics system in place. So for instance, the persecution risk is all done using SQL in the base Postgres database. But to allocate snare risk, we're using some R code. So we push all these data to another instance where we then run an R process as a function, allocate the risk value to the data and push it back into the database. So again, the focus has been on trying to make it as open as possible, so that if we've got a conservation manager or researcher that would like to allocate risk to points and they've got existing functions, we can then implement those functions in the platform fairly easily. So focusing on R, effectively R, Python, and SQL. And then we take that data once a day that has been allocated with these risk tags and push it to existing platforms, and that's where we're pushing it to EarthRanger as well, and I'll show you an example of that. And then finally, the whole goal is, because some of these risk processes rely on models like the algorithm that Louise worked on with the snare risk, we understand that having a feedback loop from the field back into our models is really going to be helpful to train them. So for instance, as we get more snare data from the field, we can then use that to improve our underlying landscape model. So this is an example of we're pushing from the system simple animal location to EarthRanger, which is not particularly difficult to do given the flexibility of EarthRanger's API. But then we've, and again, thanks so much to EarthRanger for this, because they were incredibly open to assisting us with this, but they effectively made an animal at risk schema within their data structure, where we can say, there's an animal at risk at this point in time. The risk is a snare risk in this example. The risk level is 98, and that's a percentage. This is where that snare risk occurs, and this is who to call. So if Grant Beverly is not in Johannesburg, he might be close by, and he can go and solve that problem. So I must say the flexibility of it being able to push different data into EarthRanger is a huge plus, and I'm going to briefly speak about where some of the other systems that exist where we don't have that flexibility. So we've got some work to do still. I think we underestimated slightly the level of intensity that needs to go into establishing the geofence layer. You've got to really be precise with those geofences. So we're probably spending more time on that than we thought we would initially. As more data comes in on things like risk, on snare risk, we want to improve those risk layers using additional snare data. And we're quite excited. We see that EarthRanger's got this opportunity now to capture data on events as well. And we're hoping to then use EarthRanger to facilitate our feedback for something like snaring. And then what's quite important for us is that, and I guess unfortunately not all conservation managers are using programs like EarthRanger. And so we have to facilitate the integration into other programs like CMOR. I mean, we've been working in Kruger National Park, and where they're using CMOR fairly extensively. We've also seen that having an email SMS alert has been quite helpful for our core team. And then we're exploring WhatsApp, and so we were quite excited to see the WhatsApp functionality now in EarthRanger this morning, and we quickly did a test, and that seems to work quite nicely. So, but we have started working on the WhatsApp alerts, because it's all good and well to have a cool front end, but if the rangers on the ground are want a WhatsApp as well, then we would like to give that to them. So we want to be open to that. And so as an example of, and the last slide is that we want to, this feedback integration, before we saw what EarthRanger offers, we can also build front end. So we've built our little own front end for feedback loops. But the building of these front ends is pretty labor intensive and development time intensive. And so we're really keen to make use of existing systems like EarthRanger. So it's nice to see the work that you guys are doing, and especially with the Smart Integrate. We think there's a huge potential for us to work in collaboration with you on that. And then just a word of thanks to our sponsors, the Barter Legacy Fund and Oak Foundation, and the collaboration that we have, and the logos on the screen. Thanks very much.